Hi guys, and welcome back to my whiskey channel, The Whisky Speaker, and as you probably know by now, I'm Nathan. Today we're going to be talking about whiskey casks. Now these are really important component to the whiskey industry. Experts reckon that the taste from oak can actually account for something like 80% of the flavour taste in profile of what actually goes into that bottle of whiskey. So it's really important that they get this right. Now most of our oak casks from the UK are outsourced from the good old US of A, where they obviously have the absolutely flourishing bourbon industry, and they have this brilliant rule where they can only use casks once before they have to be shipped over here. They're known as barrels and they're about 200 litres, and also they produce hogsheads which are about 250 litres. At the other end of the spectrum, the big boys, you've got the sherry butts from Spain and other European oaks, mainly from France. Spain obviously producing sherry, like just mentioned, which is Pedro Jimenez being a prime example. You know, absolutely adored by like brands like Macallan and Dalmore, who really want to get their hands on these prized whiskies. Just to give you an idea of cost, a white oak bourbon barrel from America can set you back about £180 if I'm not mistaken. At the other end of the spectrum, the large barrels, then butts, which come from Spain, they could be possibly £500, £600 a barrel. You know, they are like the sought after product of choice for anybody who is a distiller wanting to create that most beautiful product. So the reason we do this in the UK is because in the 1500s and in the 1600s, when we was busy building an armada during the Elizabethan period and the Tudor period, we was trying to sail the seven seas and defend ourselves from the French and the Spanish, but fortunately we're on good terms now, so that's obviously helped a lot, which is great. But it meant during that process we cut down most of the forests in the UK, so we don't have our own oak reserves. And also there's a law in place now that certain trees that are a certain size in the UK are listed, and therefore can't be cut down and used for making oak barrels. That's not to say that oak barrels can't ever be made from UK oak, because it has been done in the past, but our oak compared to European oak, for instance, has a lot more knots in it, so a lot more basically round circles in the strips of wood where branches have grown out, and therefore it doesn't make it so easy to cut a nice stave, which is the length of wood that makes up the heart or the body of the barrel. With that in mind, we therefore, as I said, import most of the casks. So when they come over to the UK, they come normally in a flat pack. Sometimes they are still left as they were from the distilleries, the wineries, and in some rarer cases the breweries from the other countries. But in order to obviously get volume, they're normally put in a container and flat packed, so all the wooden staves are stacked, taken over to places like Speyside Cooperage, which if anybody hasn't been there, honestly check it out. What these guys do is absolutely amazing. It actually takes over 7 years as an apprentice to become a qualified cooper. Now once they reassemble the outside using the metal hoops in order to keep the staves in place, they will then char the barrel, which basically helps split the wood inside with fire, and that will in turn help lignins and tannins, all the chemical components, be extracted from the wood when the spirit penetrates into it and draws out all them lovely kind of vanilla and marzipan flavours. But in the American industry, sometimes they call this process either light, so it's a very short burst of fire, medium, obviously increasing the amount of time fire is in contact with the wood, or if they're going all out, then it's alligator. From that, what happens is the charcoal inside actually now acts as a filter to help remove impurities from the whiskey new make spirit when it is poured into the barrel. But we're jumping the gun a little bit. What happens is new ends are put onto these barrels, which are normally then not charred. With the complete barrel then shipped off to wherever the distillery is, the new make spirit is poured into the cask at about 63.5%. That's roughly an industry standard, but it can vary, obviously depending on trying to keep that profile of character absolutely consistent, but generally speaking about 63.5% alcohol by volume. Once that's gone inside the vessel or the cask, that is then effectively like a lung, and what happens is, obviously on the rare occasion, dare I say it, you know, when Scotland is lucky enough to get a lovely bit of ray of sunshine and things heat up there, you know, then the cask or the wood itself will expand, allowing vapour to escape. That process is known as the angel share, in which about every year 2% of alcohol evaporates, which is about an average. So cheeky little angels there. With that in mind, the water goes up as a result, and the alcohol volume inside the cask goes down. So damp, cool climates have that effect. If you then basically transfer the same cask and you took it over to a place like Tel Aviv into the Milk and Honey Distillery in Israel, you will basically see the opposite effect happen. Because of how hot and dry and humid the climate is, the alcohol volume will go up and the water level will go down. So it's funny how, depending on where that cask is located in the world, the effects of what happens with that wood when it expands and contracts has on the whiskey. Now, going back to the sizes, because some people say size matters, make of that what you will, but the large ones, 500 litres, it means that the spirit in contact with the cask, it has a less powerful effect on the spirit, because it's the wood surface, getting slightly technical now, the wood surface ratio to spirit is less, whereas the smaller the cask, the more concentrated the components from the wood can be extracted into the spirit. And so two casks that have had the same new make spirit poured into it, if you sat them side by side, say a small 200 litre bourbon barrel and a 500 litre sherry butt, the smaller cask will make it feel like it's tasting like it's been in there for a lot longer, compared to the larger sherry butt. Now, there's a couple of ways of storing these whiskies. They can be either put into a racked bonded warehouse in somewhere like Cooley, for instance, in Ireland. They do a lot of racked warehouse storing their whiskey, which then is like several metres high on metal frames. But traditionally, like in Scotland, you'd have dunnage warehouses which were made out of like local rock and granite, which create a damper, more stable platform for temperature and kind of a dampness that would kind of linger throughout the building. So these processes do have an amazing effect on whiskey. So if the cooler the climate that surrounds the whiskey is allowed to take hold of the cask, it means that the reaction between the wood and the spirit is slowed down remarkably. Whereas going back to Tel Aviv, the milk and honey, which they've experienced higher levels of evaporation. The interaction between the oak cask and the spirit will be a lot more profuse, and therefore the flavouring profile will be a lot more intense. Now, quickly going back to them cheeky little angels who nicked 2% of the whisky, mainly from the UK industry and the distilleries from this country. If the barrel is turned from being long ways on its side as such to on its ends, then flat ends, then what happens is the evaporation rate is actually a lot higher than that of which is on its side. So another thing we've got to look at is also the impossible question: at what point is whisky the best to be taken out of the cask? Well, the honest answer is nobody knows. A whisky that has been bottled at, let's say, 12 years old, not naming any names, and then another distillery down the road does exactly the same thing, another 12-year-old from their distillery. Well, one whisky might taste better than the other. It's absolutely, it's one of them magical puzzles that everybody tries to work out at exactly what age it's best to bottle your whisky and pour it out of the cask. Casks can be used a couple of times and recycled and recharred, but eventually what will happen is, as you're doing the recharring of a barrel, the wood itself, as you can imagine, is getting thinner and thinner each time it's burnt, and eventually the oak itself becomes exhausted and therefore can't give up any more flavouring. And so the more times you char it, the more times you fill it when you make spirit, the more time you pour whisky out of it, the more softer and subtler the flavours are that are drawn out of it. So guys, with that in mind, thank you very much for joining me on this video. I may be looking forward to doing some whisky reviews at some point, hopefully in the new month, which would be quite exciting. But I'll be coming up definitely for a video with you for next week. If you guys have any ideas of what you'd like to hear, what you'd like to know or learn about, then absolutely drop a comment in the box so far. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much for your time, and I hopefully look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now.